Good evening, welcome to week 4, looking at the Book of Joy, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu's Book of Joy, and we are looking through the 8 pillars of joy, which is how the book ends, exploring 8 pillars. So we started off with the first pillar, perspective, the most important one. So if we have a situation, an issue, a problem, if we can get the right perspective, almost stepping back and having an objective look at that problem, if we get the right perspective, if we approach it with humility and explore our part in whatever the issue is, if we're able to laugh at ourselves in the middle of it, if we have some humour, lastly, if we can have an acceptance. Now, acceptance, like the other ones, there's a fine line. There's a fine line between humility and false humility. There's a fine line between a humour which is about laughing at ourselves and a humour which is used to bring other people down and to make fun of them. And there's a fine line with acceptance too. There is a form of acceptance which is resignation and fatalism, and that's not the acceptance that we're looking at here. Neither the Dalai Lama nor Archbishop Tutu just accepted the situation as it was and thought that it could never change. So acceptance is about accepting the reality of the world as it is, accepting the reality of the world in all its pain and suffering and sorrow and beauty. It's about accepting as it is. There's a lovely old Irish saying when a tourist stops someone and asks for directions, how do we get to Donegal? The old Irish man says, oh, Donegal, if I was going to Donegal, I wouldn't start from here. And there's that feeling that we often have, is that if only this wasn't like this, it would all be fine, it would all be good. Desmond Tutu, in the book, there's a lovely bit where he says, I'm not an optimist. He says, optimism is something which almost comes from outside. It's dependent on what's happening elsewhere. And optimism can quickly slip into pessimism. There's a transient sort of feel to it. It's not something solid. So Desmond Tutu, in good biblical fashion, says, I'm not an optimist, but I am hopeful. I always have hope. And he sees hope as something much more solid, and it's not dependent on all the other things that are happening. Desmond Tutu often quotes a famous phrase which Martin Luther King quoted so often, and he in turn used it from an abolitionist minister, Theodore Parker, and it simply says, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So there's always that idea that there is an innate sense that injustice will not last and justice will prevail, and that comes, as Tutu says, about that idea of hope. In the book, Tutu says that he again goes back to scripture, and he says that he loves a lot of the prophets, and the prophets were angry and active, but always they started with an acceptance that this is reality, this is the world that we live in. And Tutu said his favourite prophet is Jeremiah, and I can understand that would be his favourite prophet. Jeremiah rages against the world as it is, and against the people and those in power, and is so active. Alistair McIntosh says the book of Jeremiah is like a handbook for social activists. So it's not accepting that this is how the world will always be. It's not resignation, it's not fatalism, it's not seeing the world through rose-tinted glasses, There's something more and something deeper in it all. So acceptance is about accepting the world as it is. This is where we are. This might not be how we would like the world to be, but this is where we start. And then it's about looking at our role within what's happening in the world just now and taking all these other pillars. Can we still laugh at ourselves in it? Do we have humility? Are we able to see our role within it? Do we have perspective? Can we step back? And I think Tutu steps back in many ways because he has that idea, that biblical idea of hope. So acceptance is another one which is, I think, quite difficult just to watch how we walk that fine line between good acceptance and the more negative side, the fatalism and resignation. And there's certain ways that we can react to the world as we find it. The most common way of reacting to the world is to mirror whatever's happening. So if there are things going on which are angry and aggressive and bitter, our most natural reaction is to mirror that and to be angry and bitter and resentful as well. So a lot of people will say that human nature almost just wants to project out whatever's happening inside. It soaks in whatever's happening to us and then it just projects it back out. And the great spiritual traditions are about saying, how do we take all that in, but then transform it so that what we put back out is something more positive. And that's through a lot of the great spiritual practices and direction, as well as quoting the prophets. Desmond Tutu also goes back to some of the mystics, and in the book he quotes Julian of Norwich, who herself had many physical ailments, many illnesses, was living through a time of great plague, so there was a lot of death going on around her, but still had that hope that this is not the world that God had wanted or created, but this is the world that we have, and this is where we start. This is where we start trying to transform it. In our spiritual practices, again, there's paradoxes, and in the book they talk especially about the paradox of a lot of Buddhist tradition. So we need goals to inspire us, to help us grow, and even to achieve enlightenment. But those goals in themselves mustn't become things that we cling to or become unhealthily attached to. We can't think that if I just had enough willpower, or if I just pushed myself a little bit more, I could get to this goal and then I would be happy. And it's a very similar paradox within the Christian faith, where we talk about we can't will God to love us anymore. Just Tutu would say, God loves us as we are. There's nothing that we can do to make God love us anymore. And equally, there's nothing that we do that will make God love us any less. We rely on the grace of God, God's gift to us. So there's all those paradoxes in there. So acceptance is about really, this is the world as it is. I have to accept it. I have to do that with humility and perspective and humour. And I also have to think about what it is that's deep down in me which I want to change, and I want to be part of that change, which is where I think hope comes from. So a little exercise for today on acceptance, and say this is about accepting the reality of the world as it is. The only place from which we can start to work for change, whether that's personal or global, is from the place where we are now. So this is a little meditation to allow us to accept our life moment by moment without judgment or the expectation for life to be other than what it is. So let's start. Sitting comfortably, either on a chair with your feet on the ground or, if you want, cross-legged, but sitting in a relaxed and dignified way. You might want to rest your hands on your legs or your lap and just be at peace. Close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. Take several long breaths through your nose. Feel your stomach rise and fall as you breathe into your belly. As we breathe in, we might think of that image of a jug of water. It fills from the bottom up. And so as we breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth, we feel our lungs fill from the bottom up. Now switch your attention from your breathing to the sounds that you hear around you. Notice how the world is alive with sound. As we listen to these sounds, thoughts about their noises might arise. There might be judgments or assessments or irritations. Let these observations and evaluations drift away. And again, release your focus from your breath, and while staying in the present moment, notice any thoughts or feelings that arise. Perhaps you will notice some discomfort in your body or have a feeling arise. You may have a thought about what you need to accomplish or something you've remembered to do today or plan for tomorrow. As the thoughts come up, let them float away too, without judging them or getting caught up in them. Begin to start seeing thoughts as thoughts without identifying with them. Just observe each moment without judgment. Let those thoughts come, notice them, let them go. We don't need to become attached to them. And we can just return to our breath again if we feel we're straying with our thoughts. Now think of a situation that you're having a hard time accepting. That could be anything that's happening just now. It might be the lockdown. It might be not being able to see a loved one. It might be a friend or family who's ill. It might be the wider situation in the world. But just bring to mind something that you find difficult to accept. Remind yourself that this is the nature of reality. These painful realities do happen to us and to those we love and to our world. Acknowledge the fact that you cannot know all the factors that have led to this event. Accept that what has happened has already happened. There's nothing you can do to change the past. Remind yourself, in order to make the most positive contribution to this situation, I must accept the reality of its existence. We can finish with one of two little passages, one from the Buddhist tradition and one from the Christian one. From the Buddhist one, this little saying: if something can be done about it, what need is there for dejection? And if nothing can be done about it, what use is there for being dejected? And from the Christian tradition, Reinhold Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, which has given comfort to so many. God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Acceptance, our fourth pillar of the mind. And we'll see as we go on from here to the four pillars of the heart, how the pillars of the mind are the ones that really ground the pillars of the heart too. So we start with perspective, taking a step back, seeing it from a different viewpoint, seeing it, as the Dalai Lama would say, from the 8 different sides, from up and down and side to side and front to back, so that we're looking at it from all different angles, not just our angle, the one that's straight in front of us. So a perspective on a situation. Our humility, which also means, is there a part that we have played in bringing this about? And it reminds us that although we're just one of the 7.8 billion in the world, as Tutu would always say, we're a very special one. And humour. To laugh at the situation and to laugh at ourselves can be difficult. But again, it's one of those really important ones to ground us. Remember, humility and humour come from the word, the Greek humus, meaning the earth. These are ones that ground us. And acceptance. Not wishing that it was different. Not resignation or fatalism. This is about saying this is where we are. This is reality. This is where we begin. It's not how it should be, but this is where we start. Acceptance, a really difficult one, and those 2 prayers from the Buddhist and Christian tradition, I think, are really helpful ones of reminding us that some things aren't worth worrying about because there's nothing we can do about it, and there are things that we can do something about. So we need to get up and do something about the ones that we can. Well, the 4th pillar of joy. And next week we'll look at the 4 pillars of the heart. Thank you for watching. Take care. God bless.